Have you ever been told that everything you've built, every hour, every line of code, every quiet success was suddenly worthless? It doesn't happen with shouting or drama. Sometimes it happens with a smile, a buzzword, and a handshake from someone who never saw what you prevented, only what you didn't promote. My name is Marcus Lane. For over a decade, I led the technology systems at Belridge and Morrow LLP, one of the most respected law firms in the Pacific Northwest. I wasn't flashy. I didn't chase trends. I built a system that worked, not just in theory, but when it counted most. During audits, late-night filings, last-minute depositions. Then the new VP of technology arrived. New title, new philosophy, same condescending tone. Marcus, the future is AI-integrated cloud ecosystems. What you built was good, for its time. 3 weeks after my last day, the future failed. What followed wasn't just a crash. It was a cascade. Lost data, furious partners, looming sanctions, and the call they never thought they'd make. This is the story of how I was fired for protecting client data, then asked to save the system I was punished for defending. But more than that, it's about why quiet systems and quiet people still matter. I didn't set out to work in law. My background was in systems engineering, supply chain optimization, ERP backends, the kinds of software most people never see, but notice immediately when it fails. What I loved wasn't the code itself, but the calm it created, the confidence that things would just work. After a decade in manufacturing tech, I made an unlikely shift. A friend from grad school called me half in panic. His mid-sized law firm had just lost 6 months of billing data in a migration gone wrong. They needed someone who could fix things, not just explain what went wrong. I told him I'd take a look. That was 12 years ago. The firm was Belridge and Morrow LLP, then a 40-attorney outfit with prestige, but outdated infrastructure. I still remember my first walk through their server room, half of it running on legacy software so brittle no one dared touch it. But the problems weren't just technical, they were cultural. Attorneys, paralegals, admins, none of them trusted the tools they were using. Systems were patched together across decades, duct-taped by consultants who billed by the hour and vanished at the first sign of real pressure. On my third day, a junior partner lost access to a case folder the night before a federal court appearance. 2 hours on the phone with support, no solution. I stayed until 3 a.m., wrote a patch, restored the folder, and quietly added a rollback script for every active matter in the firm. No one asked me to. But the next morning, that partner told the managing director I was the only reason the firm didn't get sanctioned yesterday. That was the beginning. I didn't just fix the software, I rebuilt it. Slowly, and always with input from the people who used it most. I sat with paralegals at 6 p.m. while they navigated deadline chaos. I listened to attorneys mutter about too many logins and impossible redactions. I noticed what people didn't say in meetings, but showed in their workflow. Over 2 years, I created a modular in-house platform we eventually called Archway. Archway wasn't flashy, but it worked. Time tracking, billing, document linking, metadata compliance, secure offline syncing, it handled all of it. Most importantly, it didn't break under pressure. When a high-profile pharmaceutical case demanded a minute-by-minute breakdown of litigation work across 5 jurisdictions, Archway pulled the reports in under 5 minutes. When an opposing counsel accused our side of inflating hours, Archway's forensic logs made the dispute disappear overnight. That's when Ellen Morrow, one of the founding partners, pulled me into her office. She didn't talk tech. She talked trust. I don't know what half your platform does, Marcus, she said, but I know this. Since you built it, no one has blamed the system for anything. That's not normal. That's excellence. She promoted me to CTO 6 months later. Over time, Archway scaled with the firm, from 40 to 80 attorneys, from 1 office to 3. It adapted, integrated with client portals, stayed compliant with evolving bar rules, and even included accessibility upgrades after a blind associate joined our litigation team. When other firms spent 6 figures adapting third-party solutions, we already had features live, but Archway had one critical flaw. It was invisible. It never made headlines, never needed a task force, never crashed spectacularly enough to warrant a dramatic rescue. It was the infrastructure that made everything else seem smooth, which meant eventually someone would come along and assume it wasn't doing much at all, that someone arrived with the title Vice President of Technology Strategy and a belief that no legacy solution could be better than a cloud-based, AI-integrated subscription suite. His name was Damian Kane, and from the first meeting it was clear he had never experienced a hard audit, a data subpoena, or a midnight call from a court clerk. But he knew how to build a slide deck, and when someone like that walks into a room and sees stability, they don't recognize its value. They mistake it for stagnation. That misunderstanding would cost the firm everything. But first, it would cost me my job. Ellen Morrow retired quietly, just the way she led. No splashy farewell, no press release, just a simple message thanking the staff and a final walk through the office with a cup of black coffee in hand. She was the kind of leader who remembered birthdays, read full case summaries, and signed off on infrastructure budgets without turning them into a power struggle. Her departure marked more than a leadership transition. It was a shift in the firm's identity. And although I didn't realize it then, it was also the beginning of my exit. Her son, Colin Morrow, stepped in as managing partner. He was sharp, credentialed, and ambitious in a way his mother had never flaunted. Columbia Law. Clerked for a federal appellate judge. MBA from Wharton. On paper, he was perfect. But in practice, he operated differently. Where Ellen valued clarity and quiet competence, Colin preferred momentum and optics. Within weeks, he began bringing in outside consultants to modernize internal operations. Then came the title changes. Department heads became vertical leads. I was no longer Chief Technology Officer. I was now Head of Legacy Systems and Workflow Retention. It felt less like a promotion and more like a placeholder on a spreadsheet someone planned to delete. Then Damian Kane arrived. He was introduced in an all-hands meeting as the firm's first-ever VP of Technology Strategy, reporting directly to Colin. No one asked why a law firm needed a VP of Strategy for technology, especially one who had never worked in law. Damian came from a background in SaaS marketing and venture-backed health tech startups. Slick, charismatic, and fluent in corporate euphemism, he had a talent for making everything sound urgent and underwhelming at the same time. From day one, his mission was clear: disrupt the tech stack, eliminate bespoke tools, and migrate the firm to a single, scalable, AI-enabled cloud solution. Archway, the system I had spent 10 years building, was described in his preliminary report as functionally robust but strategically misaligned with the firm's future growth model. He never asked to see the source code, never requested a full systems walkthrough, never interviewed the support staff who used Archway every day. He reviewed one high-level flowchart and declared it non-extensible. That was the moment I realized he had already made up his mind. Colin backed him immediately. "We're bringing in Nimbus Law Suite," he told me one afternoon in a brief, impersonal meeting. "It's used by all the major firms in New York. Predictive analytics, automated compliance alerts, native client portals, it's the future, Marcus." I asked if they'd done a side-by-side test. They hadn't. I asked if they'd run our most complex billing scenarios through the system. They hadn't. I asked if Nimbus Law had direct integrations for our state bar compliance records. Damian responded with, "They're working on it." Still, the decision was made. Nimbus Law would replace Archway by the end of the quarter. Damian would lead the migration. My role would be to provide optional support if necessary. I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was how quickly my access changed. First it was budget approvals, then administrative dashboards. Then my direct line to Colin was replaced with bi-weekly sync meetings. Eventually, I found myself attending my own system's decommissioning briefings without being allowed to speak. It became clear. I had gone from architect to observer. The new regime didn't just want new tools. They wanted new authorship, something they could stamp their names on. And for that, the past had to be erased. Even the parts that had never once failed them. That's when I started planning my exit. Not because I saw disaster coming, although I did, but because I realized something much simpler. No one listens to the person in the room who built the thing they've already decided to destroy. The official email arrived on a Thursday morning just before lunch. Subject line, transition, planning and role realignment. It was addressed not only to me but CC'd to Colin, Damien, and HR. Polite, clinical, and utterly predictable. It thanked me for my years of foundational contribution to the firm's technology infrastructure, and noted that, as part of the firm's broader modernization initiative, my position would be phased out effective end of month. There was no mention of Archway by name. No acknowledgement of the decade spent building systems that made their compliance record spotless. Just a vague reference to legacy systems. I stared at it for a while, not angry, not even surprised, just tired. That afternoon, I was invited, summoned, really to a transition alignment meeting. Damien led it. He didn't sit down. He stood near the whiteboard, tablet in hand, flipping through his preloaded talking points. "We appreciate everything you've done, Marcus," he began as though reading from a cue card. "But we need to move fast, and frankly, we need systems that can scale beyond what a custom-built solution allows. Nimbus Law Suite offers seamless, third-party integrations, predictive analytics, and most importantly, enterprise-grade cloud compliance." He paused to let the buzzwords hang in the air like perfume. "You've had your system running for nearly a decade. But let's be honest, Marcus. There's no long-term future in one-person platforms, no matter how stable they've been. The industry's moved on." I looked at him, then at Colin, who offered a tight, almost apologetic smile. "We're not asking for a transition period. Nimbus Law has a full implementation team. You won't need to train anyone. This will be clean, and quick." The subtext wasn't hard to read. They didn't want me near the migration, didn't want my fingerprints on the handover, didn't want me around to point out what they were breaking. It wasn't just about replacing a system, it was about erasing a presence. I nodded. I didn't argue. There was no point. "Understood," I said. Damien looked slightly surprised, as if he expected a scene. Maybe he thought I'd fight, beg, make one last pitch to preserve my codebase. But what was there to preserve? The decision was made. I'd seen this before. Startups replacing veterans with consultants, executives trading institutional memory for executive narratives. Always the same justification: agility. After the meeting, I walked back to my office. It had been mine for 10 years. The window still held a faded sticker from a bar conference I'd spoken at in 2014. My whiteboard listed unfinished tasks I now wouldn't be finishing. I shut the door behind me and sat down at my desk. Then, for the first time in hours, I smiled. Because while they'd spent the last few months eroding my influence, they hadn't shut down Archway. Not fully. Deep in the infrastructure, under a maintenance domain I had quietly kept alive, the last active instance still ran. Archived, but synced. Functional, untouched. They had been too focused on replacement to bother with proper decommissioning. I opened the system. Every billing record, every integration, every internal log. Still there. I didn't copy anything. I didn't violate any agreements. But I confirmed what I already knew. The system they thought they were replacing still held the keys to their past 10 years of operation. And if anything ever went wrong, they'd either come crawling back or crash and burn trying to pretend it never mattered. I logged out, packed my things, left my keycard on the desk. The firm didn't escort me out, but it didn't stop me either. By Monday, I was no longer Marcus Lane, head of legacy systems. I was Marcus Lane, independent, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. The weekend. After I left, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. Nothing. No late-night server patches, no documentation revisions, no quiet check-ins with the compliance team before a quarterly audit. Just silence. But my mind didn't sit still. It kept wandering back. Not to the day they let me go, but to the days that made my work matter in the first place. Archway wasn't built in a vacuum. It was born out of necessity, stress, and failure, other people's failures, ones I refused to repeat. I still remember my first real week at Belridge and Morrow. A junior partner lost a critical deposition outline the night before court. The old document management system, patched together by 3 different vendors over the years, had corrupted it during a late sync. We spent 8 hours trying to recover a usable version. The attorney ended up testifying from memory. The firm won the motion, but barely. I walked out of the building that night knowing this place needed more than a tech fix. It needed a safety net. So I started watching. Not just systems, but people. I watched how paralegals juggled impossible deadlines, how associates logged hours at 2 a.m. through sheer will and caffeine. I saw how even the best of them made mistakes, not because they were careless, but because their tools weren't designed for real-world pressure. Every glitch cost billable time. Every delay risked a client relationship. That's when I stopped thinking like a developer and started thinking like a support beam. I wasn't building a platform. I was building institutional memory, coded, into features that lawyers wouldn't even notice until they saved them. Archway began as a simple time-tracking tool, but I layered it with redundancy, offline capability, customizable workflows, and auto-saving protocols that triggered every 6 seconds. 6 seconds. That number came from watching an associate lose 20 minutes of billing because she'd been too focused on editing a motion to hit save. She didn't complain. She blamed herself. But I knew better. Over the years, I built integrations with bar associations, automated compliance checks, embedded client-specific billing rules, and created a reporting engine that could pull 10,000 lines of financial data in under 30 seconds, formatted to the exact specifications of state and federal courts. The system scaled not because it was big, but because it was intimate. Every function existed because someone had once broken under pressure and needed something to catch them next time. There was the wrongful death case where we had to correlate over 500 hours of expert testimony across 5 jurisdictions. Archway didn't blink. There was the antitrust litigation that required document-level billing proof, down to the timestamp. Archway had it, every click, every edit, every second. It never failed because it wasn't designed for perfection. It was designed for failure. For panic. For when the lights flickered and the deadline was 5 minutes away. That's what Damien never understood. To him, Archway looked outdated because it didn't brag. But the system didn't need to. Its job wasn't to impress a boardroom. Its job was to hold the floor when everything else started to collapse. And it had. Every time. Leaving Belridge and Morrow didn't feel like a fall. It felt like walking out of a room I'd spent years keeping warm, only to realize someone else had opened all the windows. I didn't storm off. I didn't post anything online. I just shut the door behind me and drove home. But something had shifted. Something quiet but permanent. I wasn't an employee anymore. I wasn't a title on an org chart. I was on my own. The next morning I registered a domain, laneadvisory.tech. I'd bought it years earlier on a whim, back when Archway was still young and I half joked about going solo one day. I didn't know what I'd do with it then. Now I did. I spent the first week building a basic site, clean layout, simple contact form, no marketing fluff. Just my name, credentials, and one sentence at the top. Custom software shouldn't be smarter than the people who use it. It should be smarter because of them. Emails trickled in. A local nonprofit asked if I could help stabilize their donor tracking platform. A former colleague wanted advice on secure data retention policies for remote staff. The work wasn't flashy, but it was real, and it reminded me why I had stayed in this field in the first place, to make things that didn't break under pressure. I didn't reach out to Belridge. I didn't need to. I knew how long their migration plan was scheduled to take. I knew which of their ongoing cases would hit friction first. I had seen their audit calendar. It wasn't a question of if they'd run into trouble. It was a matter of which problem would catch fire first. In the meantime, I worked in peace. I rewrote tools I'd neglected. I read case studies. I had coffee in the morning without checking logs. The world didn't fall apart without me, but part of me knew a piece of theirs might. And if it did, I wouldn't return angry or smug. I'd return with an invoice. Because the thing about building systems that last is this. Eventually, the people who took them for granted remember what they were built to protect. And when that day came, I would be ready. It was exactly 23 days after I left the firm when the call came. I was in a coffee shop near my apartment, updating some deployment documentation for a non-profit client, when my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Ria Kapoor, junior partner at Belridge & Morrow. Smart, thorough, one of the few who actually took time to understand how Archway worked, not just what it did. "Hi, Marcus," she said, her voice low but tightly wound. "Is this a good time?" I closed my laptop. "Of course. Everything. Okay?" "No, not even close." I didn't speak. I let the pause stretch. People only start with "not even close" when they're already at the edge. She exhaled. "It's the Hanover case. The billing records are gone. 3 months. Hundreds of hours. Nimbus law says it's a temporary synchronization disruption, but we have a hearing on Friday. The judge wants documentation down to the minute for cost justification, and we can't access any of it. I had expected something like this eventually, but not this soon, and not this bad." "Have you escalated to Nimbus law support?" I asked. "We've been on call since 5 a.m. Their Tier 2 support is in Singapore. No one will give us a timeline. Damien's spinning it as a cloud latency issue. Meanwhile, Colin is getting emails from the client's general counsel, asking whether we've committed billing fraud." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Of all the cases to implode, Hanover was the worst. Multinational fraud, internal audits, hypersensitive billing oversight. It had been the case that prompted me to build Archway's progressive logging system in the first place. "Is my old environment still online?" I asked. There was a pause, then a faint chuckle. "Technically, yes. It never fully shut it down. It's isolated, still running in a sandbox environment." Of course it was. Nimbus Law's team hadn't even understood how Archway was embedded in the firm's billing structure. They'd just yanked the front-end access and hoped for the best. "I need access to that sandbox and a secure data port," I said. "And Raya, this would be a consulting engagement, not a favor." "Understood. Name your rate." $400 an hour. I'll need a contract and indemnity language in writing before I start." There wasn't even a pause. "Done. I'll have it by the time you get here." I hung up and stared at my phone for a moment. Just 23 days ago, I'd been let go as a relic of the past. Now they were calling me back to salvage a case that could define their quarter. I walked to my car with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. Not vindication, not revenge, just clarity. They hadn't replaced my system, they'd replaced the idea of me. The reality, however, was still waiting, fully intact, fully operational, and ready to remind them why it had worked in the first place. By the time I pulled into the firm's parking lot, a temporary badge was already waiting for me. Inside, the mood was electric. Frantic conversations, tense stares, unanswered phones. I knew that energy well. It was the unmistakable atmosphere of a system breaking down. Not just technically, but culturally. And this time I wasn't the one holding it together. I was the one they had to bring back to stop the bleeding. Ria met me in the lobby, eyes sharp but exhausted. Her blazer was wrinkled and her phone was still in her hand. Mid-email or mid-crisis? Probably both. She didn't bother with small talk. "Conference room 3B. We set you up on a clean machine. The sandbox is live, full access." "IT didn't wipe it?" "They didn't know what to wipe," she said, almost smiling. "Turns out Nimbus never mapped your dependencies. They assumed the data had already been migrated. Classic. They'd treated a decade of custom workflows as if it were just another SharePoint migration." I followed her through the familiar halls. The office had changed. New art on the walls, updated signage, but the nervous energy in the air was the same as I remembered in crisis mode. People clustered around screens, whispering in panicked tones. And in the background, the unmistakable sound of a firm trying very hard to look like it wasn't falling apart. Inside the conference room, the laptop was already running Archway's interface. Still clean, still fast, still mine. I logged in. The system blinked to life without hesitation. Billing records for the Hanover case, fully intact. Metadata logs, complete. Time entries, time-stamped, categorized, and compliant. No sync, errors, no missing blocks, no latency, no excuses. I started the export. The report engine spun through 18,000 billing entries, matched them against case milestones, redacted sensitive internal notes per regulatory flagging, and formatted the final output for court submission. Total runtime, 8 minutes and 24 seconds. I looked up. Rhea hadn't moved. She watched like she was waiting for something to go wrong. "Done," I said. She stepped forward and scrolled through the PDF output, flipping page by page. Her shoulders finally dropped. "You just saved us from sanctions," she said, almost in disbelief. "Nimbus told us they'd need 2 days just to find the corrupted index." I shrugged. Archway indexes in real time and stores redundancies, locally. Even if the network fails, it keeps going. A knock at the door interrupted us. Damian Kane walked in, looking several shades paler than the last time I'd seen him. His shirt was untucked. His phone vibrated in his hand like a lifeline. He couldn't answer. "I heard you were back," he said. "Temporary engagement," I replied, not looking away from the screen. "Business continuity." He nodded, swallowing the phrase like it was poison. "Glad you could assist," he said. "We're close to resolving things with Nimbus, but, transitions are messy." "That's one word for it," I said. His eyes landed on the stack of reports now sitting printed beside the laptop. He knew exactly what they were. He also knew that without them, the firm would be facing a judge in 24 hours with no defense. "You should know," he added awkwardly. "The partners really appreciate your professionalism during all this." I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I had no interest in making him feel better. "I'm going to begin validating the rest of the case data now," I said to Rhea. "There's a good chance the gaps go deeper than just Hanover." She nodded. "Do whatever you need. Just don't let us fall apart." She didn't mean the system. She meant the firm, and I understood, because what I had built wasn't just a platform, it was a spine. And now that they'd torn it out, they were finally learning how much weight it had been holding. I stayed late that night, working alone in the conference room as the office slowly emptied. The fluorescent lights dimmed on motion sensors, casting parts of the hallway into shadow. Most of the staff had gone home, but I kept going, pulling logs, running comparisons, mapping what Nimbus had touched and what it had broken. What started as a single case failure was rapidly revealing itself as something deeper, wider, and far more dangerous. By 9:15 p.m., I had confirmed that over 40% of active billing data had been either misindexed or corrupted during the Nimbus migration. Historical metadata linking tasks to matters had been stripped. Redacted fields were exposed in exported files. Several automated compliance flags, including ADA document formatting requirements, had been entirely ignored by Nimbus's default configurations. The system they'd promised as court-ready was a time bomb. The partners didn't know it yet, but the firm was sitting on potential malpractice claims if any of that data made it into client hands. But that wasn't the worst of it. While reviewing the migration logs, I found something that didn't sit right: an override key. A manual data import logged under an admin credential not issued by Belridge IT. That's when I noticed the signature field. D. Kane Admin NL Strategics. IO.NL. Strategics. The parent company of Nimbus Law. It took me less than 5 minutes to confirm what I already suspected. Damian Kane hadn't just chosen Nimbus Law because it was future-facing. He had a pre-existing relationship. A long one. LinkedIn told the story quickly. Damian had worked as a senior consultant for NL Strategics 2 years before joining. Belridge, his wife Lena Kane, was listed as Director of Product Partnerships. And according to a recent industry conference video, she'd helped broker the Nimbus Law licensing deals with a forward-looking mid-size firm on the West Coast. Her words, not mine. Belridge and Morrow hadn't simply made a bad tech decision. They'd signed a nearly $1 million contract without a conflict of interest disclosure. And now, thanks to that decision, They were teetering on the edge of systemic failure. I took screenshots, compiled documentation, annotated every audit trail that showed how Nimbus had bypassed internal controls. I encrypted the package and sent it to Ria with a single message. "You need to see this before the partners do." She responded within 10 minutes. "Are you still at the office?" I was. She came straight from her apartment, hair tied back, coat still draped over one arm. I walked her through the evidence, slowly, thoroughly. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said quietly, "This isn't just negligence, this is liability." I nodded. At minimum, it violates internal procurement policy. At worst, it opens the door to litigation from clients who paid for systems they now can't trust. Ria picked up the printouts. Ellen Morrow still holds equity, even though she retired. She has veto power on tech partnerships above a certain threshold. You think she'll act? I think she's been watching from a distance, waiting to see if Colin and Damien could stand on their own. Now she knows. She didn't need to say more. The next morning, Ellen was in the building. No announcement, no title. Just a calm presence walking down the hall with a manila folder in one hand and silence trailing behind her like gravity. By noon, a special board meeting was scheduled. By 2 p.m., Damien Kane's access had been suspended pending internal investigation. Ria called me just before sunset. "You started something," she said. "I didn't start it," I replied. "I just didn't let it stay buried." What began as a routine modernization had become a case study in arrogance, concealment, and fragile loyalty. Belridge hadn't just lost data. They'd gambled the trust of their clients, their partners, and their legacy on a sales pitch dressed in sleek UI and Silicon Valley buzzwords. And now, the bill was coming due. The boardroom felt colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the marble table or the fact that no one was making eye contact. 7 partners sat in silence as Ellen Morrow took her seat at the head. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone shifted the room's center of gravity. Ria handed her a copy of the report. My report. Ellen flipped through the pages quietly, nodding once as she absorbed the information. When she looked up, her gaze landed on Colin, who sat 2 seats away, visibly uncomfortable. "You signed a $920,000 contract," she said flatly, "without disclosing that your VP of technology had prior employment and ongoing family ties to the vendor. Do you understand the legal implications of that, Colin?" Colin's voice cracked slightly. "There was no intention to deceive." Damien believed, "This isn't about belief. It's about diligence, about judgment." Across the table, another partner cleared her throat. "Ellen, the system is failing. We've had 2 clients threaten to terminate. Billings delayed on 14 matters. We missed a redaction deadline in a securities case." Ellen tapped her finger on the stack of reports. "And the only functioning records we have are from a system we were told was obsolete." She turned to me. "Mr. Lane, can your original platform be restored in full?" "Yes. The core infrastructure is untouched. With system logs and backups intact, full restoration and testing could be done in 48 hours. And compliance? Built in and court-tested. Nothing was lost, just ignored." Another partner leaned forward. "And your consulting rate?" $400 an hour. Fixed contract with a 6-month post-implementation support clause. No one blinked at the number. Ellen looked around the table. "Before we vote, does anyone have further questions?" Colin opened his mouth, then closed it. "All right. Motion. To terminate the Nimbus Law contract, effective immediately, and restore Mr. Lane's original system under his leadership." 7 hands rose. Unanimous. Colin stared at the table, jaw clenched. He didn't protest. There was nothing left to say. As the room dispersed, Ellen approached me quietly. "I made a mistake letting Damien into this place. I forgot that what works doesn't always sparkle, and what sparkles rarely works." I nodded. "Archway was never built to impress, just to endure." She offered a rare smile. "It did both, Marcus. It just took a little fire for everyone else to notice." Legacy systems aren't just lines of code, they're decisions, judgments, and years of institutional memory, quietly doing their job while louder solutions promise more than they can deliver. In tech, it's easy to mistake stability for stagnation. But when everything is on the line, your credibility, your compliance, your clients, what you need isn't the flashiest platform. You need the one that won't flinch under pressure. This wasn't just a story about a system. It was a reminder that experience doesn't always wear a title, that trust isn't built in quarterly strategy decks but in late nights, clean recoveries, and systems that work when no one else is watching. Sometimes it takes a breakdown to remind people of the backbone. And sometimes, the real upgrade isn't replacing what's been working quietly in the background, but understanding why it worked in the first place. What do you think? Have you ever watched a modern solution unravel what already worked? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this resonated with you, consider liking or sharing it. It helps more than you think, and it just might land in the hands of someone facing their own version of this exact mess. Thanks for watching.